In this video, I want to prove several things. The first thing is that the sages in the Talmud made mistakes in many things, in a lot of factual and simple matters. And why is it important to prove this? Any reasonable and intelligent person knows and is certain that the sages would make mistakes, because they lived in the first century CE and they didn't know what we know today. That makes a lot of sense. But in ultra-Orthodox education, they teach in the yeshivas that the sages were so wise that the divine presence spoke through their mouths, and that they received even all the sciences as a tradition from Moses at Sinai. So this lie also needs to be dispelled. That's the first thing. The second thing, besides the fact that they are mistaken, is that they also give sermons. And it's important to note that their sermons are about inventing something new from the text, something that isn't actually written. That's the meaning of the word darash, to derive something new that isn't written, which means they can say whatever they want. Now they come and say things in their sermons based on their mistaken natural perception of reality. In other words, they bluffed and made up sermons. And from these sermons, they derived the laws that are still observed to this very day. The third thing I want to prove is their way of thinking. The fact that they are mistaken is obvious. Any reasonable person understands that. But the level of thinking of the sages is a very confused way of thinking. It's not that they were like Aristotle, who was a genius and made mistakes. No, they were like market vendors with the thinking level of an elementary school child. Then I will also show you this through their questions and answers, how they debated. And based on their discussions, you can assess their level of thinking. And the fourth thing I want to prove here in this video is how the rabbis defend the sages who were wrong at any cost. And they are unable to just come and say, okay, they were wrong, so what can you do? No, they can't, because part of their basic belief is that they don't make mistakes. So if they find a mistake, they have to defend it at all costs. So let's start. First, let's start with the fact that they really do teach them that the sages knew everything, even all the scientific and physical matters, which is amusing and ridiculous. But as I say, religion stands on three things: on lies, on fear, and on obedience. So first of all, they lie by claiming they're great sages, and they lie by scaring people as if they know what exists in the Garden of Eden and the world to come. And this fear makes people obey. So here I'm exposing their lie. And the lie is that the sages supposedly knew science as well. It's just like that. So in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, page 1b, they say the following: 50 gates of understanding were created in the world, and all of them were given to Moses. Except for one. That is, 50 gates of understanding were given to Moses. God gave them to Moses. So what? If God gave Moses all the laws of physics, science, and biology, then wow, these are serious people. And the Ramban, in his introduction to his commentary on the Torah, in the introduction to the book of Genesis, I'll read it to you. He comes and says that all the acts of creation and all that is accepted are given to the sages with the four forces, with the power of minerals, meaning everything that happens with gold, copper, and silver, and the vegetative power of the earth and the soul of movement, how a plant grows, how an animal is beautiful, and how it has a soul. For all of them, Moses was told about their creation, their essence, their powers, and their actions, and this is what is accepted among the sages. Now, this is complete nonsense. Anyone who knows the Talmud knows they are constantly making mistakes. And here is one of the important things in this video, to show you their mistakes. So the first mistake is about lice, the lice that are found on the head, and we are always finding lice on our children. They come and claim in Tractate Shabbat, the question is whether it is permitted to kill a louse on Shabbat. That is the discussion here. Is it allowed to kill a louse on Shabbat? It is forbidden to kill living creatures on Shabbat. This is one of the 39 primary categories of labor called slaughtering or killing, which is prohibited on Shabbat. Now what happens with a louse? So it is written in Tractat Shabbat, page 107b, as follows: the sages and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, whoever kills a louse on Shabbat is like one who kills a camel on Shabbat. That means, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it is forbidden to kill a louse because it is as if you are killing a camel, a large animal. But the opinion of the sages is not like that. And both of them say that a louse, because it does not reproduce, that is, Rashi says it does not reproduce, but rather emerges from the sweat of a person or from the earth. In other words, there is some kind of spontaneous generation from inanimate matter, so they believed that a louse does not reproduce, and therefore it is permitted to kill it on Shabbat. Now, okay, so one says it is forbidden to kill a louse because it is like a camel, and one says no, it is permitted to kill a louse because it does not reproduce. Now the Gemara comes and explains their disagreement between Rabbi Eliezer and the sages. What is the disagreement? The disagreement is about how we learn that it is forbidden to kill animals. We learn it from the work of the tabernacle. Everything that was done in the work of the tabernacle was forbidden on Shabbat. So one of the things they did in the tabernacle, in the desert, when they traveled in the desert and built the tabernacle, was that they made hides from rams. That is, they slaughtered rams. So if they slaughtered rams, that's why one of the primary labors is that it is forbidden to slaughter, forbidden to kill rams. So what is the disagreement regarding a louse? The question is, which animals do we compare to rams? Look at the kind of perception, the kind of thinking they had. Rabbi Eliezer says, just as rams have the taking of a soul, meaning you kill them, so too anything that involves taking a soul, any animal, including a louse. The rabbis, what do they think? I do not learn from rams the following: just as rams reproduce and multiply, so too any animal that reproduces and multiplies, that is, reproduces through a process involving male and female, then it is forbidden to kill. Rams reproduce and multiply, but a louse, which is created from the earth and does not have male and female, and does not reproduce through a process involving male and female, is not similar to rams. Therefore, it is permitted to kill it in the field. So what is this teaching? Do you understand the way the sages think? Maybe I should learn from rams. Just as rams have horns, so too only animals with horns? Or since rams are kosher animals, then only kosher animals are forbidden to kill on Shabbat. You can make up whatever you want about rams. Why do you specifically include this detail of reproducing and multiplying? Where does that come from? And they don't try to explain the method. There's no systematic approach here. It's like some kind of whim of the heart. And they say, oh wait, rams reproduce and multiply. Well, then the louse doesn't reproduce and multiply. So therefore it's permitted to kill it on Shabbat. So we have two things here. First, they were wrong, because lice also have male and female, and they do reproduce and multiply. And ever since Louis Pasteur conducted that great experiment and proved that there is no such thing as spontaneous generation, but rather life comes from life. Louis Pasteur, who lived from 1822 to 1895, proved that microorganisms are not spontaneously generated. Rather, there must be life that comes from life. So that's it. So that's a mistake. Besides the mistake, what kind of teaching style is this? Forcing things. Even if we assume that lice did not reproduce, why would you specifically use that trait of reproducing and multiplying as an example? Maybe we could say horns, maybe we could say a kosher animal. Now look, that's not the end. Then they come and ask a question. Now, from the questions and answers, we'll see the level of Chazal's thinking. They come and ask, wait, doesn't the louse reproduce and multiply? But didn't the master say, that is, there is some great rabbi who said that the Holy One, blessed be he, sits. He made a statement that isn't related to whether lice reproduce or not. Pay attention to what they're asking. They always ask about other rabbis. They never bring a fact from natural reality. They ask, but wait, didn't some great rabbi say that the Holy One, blessed be He, sits and sustains and feeds from the horns of the wild ox, from the rayim, that's a very large animal, and down to lice eggs, which are the smallest thing. In any case, this great rabbi said lice eggs. This implies that lice have eggs. And if there are eggs, it means they reproduce and lay eggs. And they are not created from the earth, and so on. That's the question of the Gemara. That is, they're not asking from any reality, experiment, or investigation. Just some rabbi said it. Now pay attention to the answer, which is completely ridiculous. No, what he said, lice eggs, doesn't mean that lice have eggs, and then you deduce from that that they have male and female and a process of reproduction. No, what he said, lice eggs, means there is a type of animal or insect whose name is lice eggs. It's not the eggs of the lice, but rather its name is lice eggs. Tell me, is this serious? I'm a teacher in Israel. If a student were to respond to a text and interpret it in such a way that the Holy One, blessed be He, sustains from the horns of wild oxen to batskanim, and that batskanim refers to an animal called batskanim, even though we don't use that term, and neither did the sages, since they actually ask about it, I would tell him, that's not understanding the text. You can't interpret a text like that. So here, these are the two things, actually three things we've learned here. First, that the sages are mistaken, because a louse does reproduce, yet they say it doesn't, and a louse actually does reproduce. Second, this interpretation about rams. What about rams? What are you trying to teach me from rams? You could learn anything from rams. And the third thing is their discussions, specifically among rabbis, about matters that are in between. It's as if some children are coming here and having a debate. Now, I'll bring another example to reinforce this point, and it's from Tractate Cholin. In Tractate Cholin, page 122b, there's a Mishnah. The Mishnah says as follows, pay attention. An ox whose half is flesh and half is earth. In other words, there is gratitude. The sages understood that there is a reality of a mouse that is half flesh and half earth, and Rashi explains, there is a type of mouse that is not born from another mouse, but rather is created by itself from the earth. Then it undergoes a process of formation created from the earth, and since it is created from the earth, it does not become a living creature, a mouse, all at once in a single moment, but rather gradually through a process. So during this process, as it turns into a mouse, half of it is already flesh, while the other half is still earth. Then they discuss and say that if someone touches the earth part of the mouse, he is pure, but if he touches the flesh part, he is impure. So clearly, anyone with common sense knows that there is no such thing as a mouse that is created from the earth, and therefore there is also no such thing as a mouse that is half flesh and half earth. So again, the sages are mistaken. And it's obvious that the sages are mistaken, but what's even more telling here is the way they interpret things in their teachings. Because they believe there was a creature, a mouse, that was created from the earth, and that there was one that was half flesh and half earth, they came up with an interpretation. And they ask, why does it say the swarming thing that swarms? Why does it say the swarming thing that swarms? This is to exclude a mouse that is half flesh and half earth. Here again is more nonsense from the sages and their distortion of the verses. They make up interpretations that aren't written in the scripture. It says the swarming thing that swarms, and they start inventing all kinds of creatures. Oh no, why does it say the swarming thing that swarms? Isn't the swarming thing enough? Oh, the intention is to exclude a mouse that's half flesh and half earth. Why are you making unreasonable interpretations that aren't written in the text, just inventing new things? And you're wrong, you're just babbling, because there's no such thing as a mouse that's half earth and half flesh. Now, the conclusion, the final point I want to leave you with is how the rabbis defend at all costs this belief that the sages never make mistakes. So there's Rabbi Yisrael Lipschitz, Rabbi Yisrael Lipschitz lived in Ashkenaz between 1782 and 1860. He was one of the great rabbis, a student of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and he wrote a commentary on the Mishnah. And in his commentary on the Mishnah, in the ninth chapter of Tractate Chulin, Mishnah 6, Rabbi Yisrael Lipschitz says the following in his commentary Tiferet Yisrael. He says this: I heard heretics, as they were called. He was already living in the 19th century, at the beginning of the 19th century, and the Haskalah movement had already begun. And the Haskalah movement, even among Jews, including those who were yeshiva graduates, began to think that the sages were mistaken, and they started to mock the sages. What are you saying, that there is a mouse that is half flesh and half earth? Pay attention to what he says. I heard heretics mocking a creation, an animal, which is mentioned here in Tractate Chulin, and they deny it, those heretics deny it, and say that it does not exist at all. Now he responds to them as if in his own commentary, Rabbi Yisrael Lipschitz. And I saw fit to mention here what I found written in a German book. See how he responds, which was written by a certain wise man from Poznan. It is only written in a German book, authored by a well-known scholar among the nations, one of the scholars of the nations. His name is Link, in his book called Eruvald, Part 1, page 327, that such a creature was found. Where? In Egypt, in the province of Thebes, and it is called the mouse, in the Egyptian language Daiphos and Akolos, and in German Fringmos. I'm not so familiar with what he is talking about here. The part in front of it, the head, chest and arms, are well formed, while the rest is still buried in clumps of earth, until after some days it all turns into flesh. Up to here are the words of Rabbi Yisrael Lipschitz. Now look, he basically, first of all, went to Egypt and checked. I saw written by someone who actually saw it written by someone else in his book, and the animal is there, and it is found in Egypt. Now, anyone with any sense understands that this is nonsense, but what's interesting here is that when a person, like Yisrael Lipschitz, has a certain kind of paradigm, a kind of conception, a kind of basic assumption and foundational belief that Chazal did not err. Now, when a person is in such a conception, in a certain paradigm, he will constantly twist himself into knots, lose his common sense, just to defend his conception. And this is what Petrarch, the humanist who lived in the 13th century, the Italian humanist, came and defined as faith. He said that faith is a strong force within the human soul. To continue to persist and hold on to that faith, even against common sense and against reality. And that's essentially what Yisrael Lipschitz did. And besides that, I believe that Hamas must be eliminated.